The lights of Los Angeles never dimmed, but inside Forrester Creations, the glow had turned cold. What once shimmered as the house of beauty now flickered with unease, its mirrored halls reflecting anxiety more than elegance. The scandal surrounding Luna Nozawa had begun as a whisper, a tragic end to a young designer's turbulent life, but in the hands of the press and the claws of social media, it had transformed into a war. Luna had been everything Forrester loved to celebrate: youth, reinvention, rebellion wrapped in silk. Her story had been spun as a tale of redemption, a troubled soul finding grace in couture. But now, in death, she was destroying the very empire that had built her. The headlines grew crueler each day. Forrester Creations, exploiting the fallen for profit. From muse to murderer, how the Forresters used Luna's pain to sell fashion. The questions came sharp and relentless. Why had the company given a platform to a woman with a violent record? Why had they ignored allegations that she attacked Will Spencer during a photo shoot dispute? And why, when her car careened into tragedy, had the Forresters remained silent instead of accountable? To the outside world, silence meant guilt. And in Los Angeles, guilt was poison. Katie Logan had weathered many storms for this family. As head of PR, she was both their shield and their confessor, the one who cleaned the bloodstains while the cameras rolled on smiling faces. She had managed Ridge's divorces, Brooke's scandals, Hope's controversies, and even Steffi's long-fought wars against rival brands. But this was different. Luna wasn't a member of the family. She was a symbol, a marketing construct turned martyr, and now her ghost was haunting every thread, every campaign, every dollar Forrester touched. Katie fought hard to protect the company's legacy, crafting statements, offering compassion, trying to remind the public that Forrester stood for artistry, not exploitation. But her empathy was treated as weakness in a world that demanded quick sacrifice to appease outrage. When the board meeting was called, the air in the conference room felt charged, almost electric. Ridge sat at the head of the table, his eyes clouded by exhaustion but still burning with that old Forrester intensity. Brooke, poised but tense, sat beside him. Carter, the company's legal counsel, watched silently while Steffi and Thomas exchanged uneasy glances. Katie entered late, her folder heavy with drafts of apologies and recovery strategies. She believed this was a meeting to approve her crisis plan. She couldn't have known it was her execution. Ridge's voice was careful, too careful, as he spoke. "We've decided to bring in outside help," he began. "The board feels we need new leadership in PR, someone with distance from the family." The words landed like glass shattering across the table. Katie blinked, stunned, searching his face for something human, some trace of the loyalty she had earned. "You're replacing me?" she asked softly. Ridge didn't meet her eyes. Brooke did, her gaze full of apology, but also resignation. The decision had already been made. The new hire was Vanessa Hart, a media strategist with a reputation as brilliant, ruthless, and unbreakable. She had salvaged collapsing brands before, often by cutting away their most damaged parts. She arrived at Forrester in sleek black, her smile sharp enough to slice through the tension. Within days, she had reorganized the PR department, rewritten press releases, and instructed every spokesperson to depersonalize emotion. When Brooke protested that compassion was part of Forrester's identity, Vanessa responded coolly, "Compassion doesn't trend. Control does." Katie, stripped of her title but still lingering in the office she'd built, felt the humiliation sink into her bones. She had always believed in the company's soul, in the idea that fashion could be healing, that beauty could be redemption. But Vanessa treated the brand like a battlefield. "We don't apologize," she told the team in her first meeting. "We redirect. Luna was not our responsibility. She was a liability. We will honor her work, not her choices. And if anyone needs to take the fall for poor oversight, we'll select the right scapegoat when the time comes." The word scapegoat hung in the air like a curse. Brooke caught Katie's eye from across the room and saw the pain written there, the realization that she was already that scapegoat. Meanwhile, The media assault intensified. Protesters gathered outside Forrester headquarters, holding signs that read, "Profit from pain is still pain," and "Luna deserved justice, not exploitation." Influencers dissected every photo from her final campaign, pointing out the symbolism of shattered glass, torn lace, the irony of a collection titled Rebirth. Forrester Creations' silence now looked strategic, and that made it unforgivable. Inside the family, fault lines deepened. Ridge doubled down on strategy. "We have to be decisive," he insisted during late-night meetings. "If the public wants a villain, we give them one who isn't us." His focus was the brand, not the people. Brooke, however, couldn't detach her heart from the equation. She watched Katie fading, her sister's confidence dissolving under the betrayal, and felt the familiar ache of moral dissonance. "We can't just abandon her," Brooke pleaded. "She gave everything to this company." Ridge's answer was curt. "She got too emotional. This isn't about feelings anymore. It's about survival." In the midst of chaos, Eric Forrester, whose health had been fragile for months, began to emerge from the fog of illness with sudden, lucid clarity. One morning, he called Brooke to his studio, the one space untouched by corporate rebranding. He stood there, surrounded by sketches and bolts of fabric, and said quietly, "When did we stop creating beauty and start manufacturing power?" His question cut deeper than any headline. Brooke, unable to answer, felt tears sting her eyes. Eric had built Forrester Creations as an expression of art, not commerce. It was supposed to celebrate humanity, not manipulate it. And now, under the weight of scandal and control, it had become a machine of survival. Katie's departure was made official in a brief internal memo. Effective immediately, Vanessa Hart will assume full leadership of communications and brand strategy. We thank Catherine Logan for her many years of service. No mention of loyalty, no recognition of sacrifice. She left the building that day quietly, her box of personal items small but symbolic, framed photos of Will, a notebook filled with speech drafts, and a single red pen she used to mark every crisis statement with honesty before corporate edits drained it dry. As she stepped out onto the street, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions about her firing, about the internal chaos, about her rumor role in the Luna scandal. She kept walking. But Katie was not done. Grief had a way of fermenting into resolve. While Vanessa tightened her grip on Forrester's image, Katie began quietly gathering her own evidence, emails, timelines, discrepancies in statements. She knew the truth about Luna's final campaign, that the marketing team had pushed her despite warning signs of instability, that a board member had silenced an intern who tried to intervene, that the accident which ended Luna's life had been preceded by weeks of deliberate pressure to perform under mental collapse. Forrester hadn't killed Luna, but they had broken her. And Katie couldn't bear the thought of her silence, being the final stone laid over that grave. Vanessa's first major move was to schedule a press conference, her version of public rebirth. The event was meticulously choreographed, a new campaign reveal titled Forward, a promise of innovation and diversity, a handful of carefully planted questions from friendly journalists. But what no one expected was Katie's presence. She arrived just as Vanessa began her speech. The cameras already live. Her appearance sent ripples through the crowd. Brooke's heart seized when she saw her sister step onto the stage, holding a folder of documents. Katie's voice, calm but steady, sliced through Vanessa's polished performance. "Before we move forward," she said, "we have to acknowledge what we've done." Gasps spread like wildfire. Security moved toward her, but Ridge raised a hand. He needed to know where this was going. Katie continued, her words carrying both sorrow and defiance. "We turned a young woman's suffering into a marketing story. We told ourselves it was inspiration, but it was exploitation. And when it destroyed her, we hid behind silence. I was part of that silence. But I won't be anymore." The conference dissolved into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, flashes blinded the stage, and Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time. Ridge looked betrayed, Brooke looked proud, and Eric, watching from home, smiled faintly through his tears. Katie's confession didn't just fracture the company, it exposed the soul they had lost. In the days that followed, Forrester Creations teetered on collapse. Stocks plunged, clients wavered, and Vanessa resigned under pressure. But in the ashes of scandal, something strange happened. Public opinion began to shift, not in sympathy, but in respect. People admired Katie's courage. They admired honesty in a world addicted to spin. Slowly, painfully, Forrester began to rebuild, not as a fortress of perfection, but as a house willing to admit its flaws. Eric insisted on returning to design, declaring that beauty must return to truth. Brooke took charge of rebuilding relationships with partners. Ridge, humbled, apologized to Katie privately, though she told him forgiveness wasn't his to claim. She had not spoken for revenge, but for conscience. If we lose everything, she told him, at least we'll know what we stood for. The final irony was that Luna, the woman whose death had nearly destroyed them, became the symbol of their rebirth. The company established a scholarship in her name, dedicated to young designers facing adversity. It wasn't redemption, it was acknowledgement. And so the war of PR ended not with victory, but with surrender, to truth, to vulnerability, to humanity. Every press conference, every headline, every apology had been a battle, but the real fight had always been within themselves, the struggle to remember why they had built this empire in the first place. As Katie walked through the Forrester courtyard one evening months later, she paused beneath the marble arch engraved with the company's founding words, "Where beauty lives." For the first time in years, she believed it again. Not because the scandals were gone, or because the brand was saved, but because honesty had returned to its foundation. The war had scarred them all, but from those scars, something alive was growing, a reminder that beauty, in its truest form, is not about perfection, but about truth laid bare, fragile and luminous, even when the world is watching. Steffi stood at the top of the Forrester Creations staircase, the same place where her mother had once made announcements that changed the company's fate, the same place where triumphs and betrayals had echoed through the marble halls for decades. The walls around her still shimmered with glamour, but the spirit of the house had dimmed. What had once been synonymous with creativity and confidence now trembled on the edge of collapse. After Katie's shocking confession and Vanessa's abrupt resignation, clients fled, partnerships dissolved, and for the first time in its long history, Forrester Creations looked vulnerable, human, even. Steffi could feel the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. She had been trained for leadership her entire life, but no lesson had prepared her for this kind of battlefield, one fought not with fabric and sketches, but with truth and consequence. Thomas stood beside her, his expression unreadable, his eyes tracing the Forrester logo engraved above the lobby entrance. "We can't let it die like this," he murmured. "Not after everything Dad, Mom, and Granddad built." Steffi nodded, though fear gnawed at her resolve. "Then we save it," she said, "even if we have to rebuild from ashes." Their plan began quietly, in the small design studio where their father once created his first collection. They agreed on one principle: no more illusions. No more false narratives about perfection. If Forrester was to survive, it had to evolve, not as a fortress of image but as a living, imperfect brand that embraced accountability. The siblings divided the battlefield. Thomas would take charge of creative rebirth, while Steffi focused on strategic alliances and rebuilding public trust. Thomas worked like a man possessed. The scandal had stripped him of distraction, leaving only his raw genius and guilt. He had designed Luna's final collection before her death. Her influence lingered in his sketches, her spirit haunting his creativity. But instead of running from that ghost, he leaned into it. He began a new line called The Imperfect Grace, a collection inspired by human flaws, emotional fractures, and the resilience born from pain. The designs were bolder, less polished, almost brutally honest. Silk clashed with leather, uneven stitching became symbolic, and every model who walked the runway had a story printed in the program booklet: a past, a mistake, a scar. Thomas knew it was risky, even polarizing, but it was real. Meanwhile, Steffi faced the corporate front lines. Reporters camped outside the building, investors demanded answers, and former partners refused to return calls. Her strategy was radical transparency. Instead of hiding, she invited key journalists into the process, giving them unprecedented access to the company's recovery. Cameras captured designers debating, tailors crying, models sharing their fears. It was messy, but the public saw authenticity in the chaos. The old PR strategies had failed because they tried to paint over truth. Steffi's plan was to let the world see the brushstrokes. Still, not everyone believed in redemption. Bill Spencer, ever the opportunist, saw Forrester's vulnerability as a chance to strike. Through Spencer Publications, he funded a rival campaign positioning his fashion investments as the future of integrity in fashion. His headlines mocked Forrester's so-called honesty as self-serving theatrics. Even Brooke began to doubt the siblings' methods, worrying that bearing too much truth would destroy the illusion of glamour that had sustained the brand for decades. Ridge, torn between his children's conviction and Brooke's caution, withdrew from decision-making, spending his days sketching alone, haunted by his own complicity. The first real test came 3 months later at the Los Angeles Fashion Ethics Summit, a high-profile event broadcast live, where Forrester Creations was scheduled to make its comeback presentation. The world waited to see whether the house that once defined elegance could rise again after scandal. The board was divided, the press skeptical, and social media brutal. Rumors swirled that if the show failed, Forrester would declare bankruptcy before year's end. Backstage, Thomas adjusted the final gown, his hands trembling slightly as he tied the ribbon on the model's back. "This isn't just about fashion," he whispered to Steffi, who was pacing nearby. "This is about proving we still have a soul." Steffi smiled faintly. "Then let's make them feel it." When the lights dimmed and the music began, silence fell across the auditorium. The first model stepped onto the runway, wearing a dress of uneven seams, the fabric hand-dyed to show visible transitions of color, like bruises healing over time. Each look that followed told a story. Garments embroidered with the names of employees who had stayed through the scandal, pieces inspired by Luna's early sketches that Thomas had saved, silhouettes that celebrated imperfection rather than symmetry. By the finale, the audience was breathless. And then, instead of a traditional bow, Steffi took the stage with a microphone. She didn't deliver a marketing pitch. She spoke from her chest, her voice trembling with both pride and grief. "We lost our way," she admitted. "We forgot that fashion is about humanity, about people, flawed, wounded, beautiful people. We hurt others and we hurt ourselves, but we are still here. And we will spend the rest of our existence trying to create something that heals instead of hides." The applause began tentatively, then grew, wave after wave, until the entire hall stood. It wasn't just appreciation for beauty, it was acknowledgement of courage. That night, social media exploded not with criticism, but with admiration. Hashtags like Imperfect Grace and Forrester Reborn trended worldwide. Orders poured in. Even critics who had once condemned them admitted the show had moved them. But success came with new complications. Investors returned, but they wanted control, new leadership, corporate oversight, profit-driven efficiency. Steffi refused. "We didn't fight this war to hand our soul to accountants," she told the board. Thomas agreed, even when it meant sacrificing lucrative deals. They wanted sustainability, not domination. That stance put them at odds with Ridge, who feared another collapse if they didn't compromise. The old generation, accustomed to wealth and prestige, couldn't understand the younger vision, that survival wasn't enough. Authenticity was the goal. Eric, in one of his lucid afternoons, called a family meeting. The entire Forrester clan gathered in the mansion's great room, surrounded by portraits of the past. Eric, frail but steady, addressed them in a voice that trembled only slightly. "I have watched this company grow from sketches to an empire," he said. "And I have seen it nearly destroyed by ego, by deceit, by fear. But what Steffi and Thomas have done, it reminds me why we began. It was never about perfection. It was about creation. About daring to reflect life as it truly is." He turned to Ridge and Brooke, his eyes clear. Let them lead. Let them make mistakes. That's how we find beauty again. The vote was unanimous. Steffi and Thomas were officially named co-CEOs of Forrester Creations, with Eric serving as honorary chairman. Brooke, though hesitant, embraced her stepchildren, admitting that perhaps her definition of legacy had grown too rigid. Ridge, humbled, finally told his children how proud he was, something he had rarely managed in words before. Months later, as Forrester Creations unveiled its new headquarters gallery, a fusion of fashion, art, and social awareness, the world saw not just a company resurrected, but transformed. Katie, standing in the crowd, watched her family reclaim its dignity. When Steffi spotted her and walked over, the two women shared a quiet moment of reconciliation. "You started this," Steffi said softly. "You reminded us what truth looks like." Katie smiled. "Then promise me you'll never forget it again." Under the spotlight, Thomas unveiled a final tribute, a sculpture made from leftover fabrics and broken glass from Luna's last photo shoot. Beneath it, a plaque read, "To those who dared to be seen." The scandal that once threatened to destroy Forrester Creations had become its rebirth. Steffi and Thomas had not just saved the company, they had reshaped it. What emerged from the wreckage was no longer merely a fashion house, but a living, breathing testament to resilience. Their designs carried scars like art. Their campaigns celebrated humanity over illusion. Forrester Creations, long synonymous with glamour, had rediscovered something far greater, grace. And in the quiet after the applause, as the lights dimmed and the world watched from afar, Steffi turned to her brother and whispered, "We didn't just save Forrester, Thomas. We saved our..."